This video is designed to teach you the basic principles of test preparation essay writing at AEI. In general, essays for standardized tests are very stylized pieces of writing. Students should focus on the components required for the exams. For example, on the GRE, following the instructions specific to each prompt is a make or break requirement that will dramatically affect writing scores, far more so than persistent grammar or spelling errors. The key to the essay sections of most standardized tests is to teach one or another specialized versions of the 5-point essay: introduction, 3 body paragraphs, and conclusion. There may also be insufficient time to use the full 5-step writing process. However, we compress the writing process into the allotted 30 minutes from start to finish. First, creating an argument. This is also known as the issue essay on the GRE. In the first 5 minutes of the 30 minutes you have, you will read the issue prompt and take it apart. You consider both sides of the issue, restate them in your own words, and use scratch paper to list the different supporting points you want to address. So in the next 2 minutes, you will select those points. You do some quick brainstorming to think of reasons and examples for both sides of the argument, and choose to write in favor of the side about which you can say the most. Third, you organize, and this should only take about a minute if you used a previously memorized template. I've included several here on the orientation webpage. The first template, you start with your introduction, which always involves a restatement of the topic prompt in the student's own words. Secondly, a statement about what the other side is. And third and finally, the thesis statement: I will argue that X is true for reasons A and B. The body includes at least 2 supporting paragraphs and a third paragraph concerning the other side of the argument. The reason the student must include the other side of the argument is to show that they are not merely a superficial thinker when it comes to argumentative writing. So the supporting paragraphs, they'll state what the reason is, provide numerous examples, and provide an explanation how this reason supports or proves the position taken in the thesis statement. Same thing with paragraph 2 with the second reason, reason B. And then the other paragraph, the other side paragraph will state, on the other hand, some people argue that, whatever the opposite side is, provide examples of how or why they might say this, and then explain how this side is wrong and how the author, the student's position, is the correct position. Finally, the conclusion, a restatement of the thesis, a summary of reasons and examples for the supporting argument, a brief consideration of the other side, and finally, some call to action. This may involve suggesting that somebody write to their representatives, to vote for somebody, to boycott a business, to do more research, whatever. But that's usually a good way to wrap up an essay. And that's just the first template. The second template suggests that the body instead include a third supporting paragraph before the other side paragraph. So that would actually make it a 6-paragraph essay, which longer is usually approved of as showing more depth of thought. The third template for the argumentative essay instead has each paragraph of support of each of the body paragraphs follow a similar pattern, stating a reason to support one side, an example, an explanation, a counterexample, and then a final explanation of how even the counterexample still shows that the author is right. Now, again, if the preferred template is memorized, selecting this template should only take about a minute. Then the student, fourth step, can spend 20 minutes typing out the essay. Don't worry about getting it, perfectly correct. Tell the students that spelling and grammar errors are less important during the writing process. What they should do is to just focus on being as clear as possible, to communicate as much meaning as possible, and not to pad their writing with unnecessary filler. Some students are more wordy than others. If you've ever read student essays, you'll find some of them have these bad habits, and you just need to give them that individual attention and guidance to help them overcome bad habits like that. The last 2 minutes of the 30 minutes they have for that argumentative essay is to do that quick proofreading. What I strongly recommend is a method I learned when I was teaching at a university, which is to go backwards, sentence by sentence. So read the last sentence looking for spelling and grammar errors, then the second to last sentence, then the previous one up, and so on and so forth as you continue going up the essay until you've read all of it backwards, basically. So you'll look for capitalization problems, paragraph division issues, double typed words, typos, small grammar errors. You want to emphasize that the students need to include some sort of transition language between each paragraph. So, for example, the introductory paragraph is as stated. You'll say something like, the topic states, da 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 da, rephrasement of the topic. The other side might argue that my thesis is, and then the beginning of the body paragraph should begin with a statement something like first, or the first reason, or anything along those lines. You want them to signpost their paragraphs. The conclusion should state in conclusion, or to sum up, something like that. You want to give them several possible suggestions for ways they can show that signposting, and tell them that it's a way to make reading easier for the reader, and it's something that the reader's going to look for and grade them on. Now, the only essay for the GMAT is the argument essay. We call this critiquing an argument. It's also known as the argument essay on the GRE, and it's usually the second essay on the GRE. Here, the process is a little bit different because what the prompt usually is an argument in and of itself. And it's the job of the student to critique this argument, to find the problems logically with the argument. And it's usually based on inductive logic. Some students may have no familiarity with logic. I encourage you to go look up your logic notes from whenever you took a logic class potentially, or to at least become familiar with the three primary argument types that you're going to see. So deconstructing the argument is still the first 2 minutes of preparing to write this essay. They have to identify the premises, the reasons why, and the conclusion, whatever it is the author's trying to persuade you is true, what course of action they want you to accept usually. You will locate and try to state whatever unstated assumptions are being made on behalf of the person who's written the argument, and they really need to use the scratch paper to help them plot all of this out and keep track of all the details. So the three main inductive types of arguments you're going to see will be sampling or generalization type arguments, where the author will say, based on this smaller group, based on town A, with a larger group has to do something. State B has to adopt this new policy that this little town has agreed on, or something like that. The strategy generally involves showing that the sample is not representative, that it does not actually give a comprehensive or truly effective picture of what the people in the larger group really want. The next type of argument they're likely to encounter is the argument based on analogy or similarity. Usually we want to be able to show that there are important dissimilarities. So just because two things are alike in one regard does not mean that they'll necessarily be alike in these other important ways. If I test medication on mice, it doesn't necessarily prove that it's going to be harmful or safe for humans in the same way. Although I think there are some cases where that is true, and I'm not enough of a scientist to tell you which. But the general principle stands is that you cannot rely on a single similarity to conclude necessarily that other similarities, other analogies are true. And the third, probably in my opinion, the most common type of argument is the cause and effect or prediction type argument, where either the author has said they've identified this cause, and I always see this correlating event happen, therefore this cause is causing the resulting event, causing the effect, or I see this effect everywhere, and I notice this cause seems to show up everywhere the effect happens, and therefore it must be the cause. So usually the strategy is going to be to show that there are other possible causes. And the phrase that I like to teach my students specifically is causation is not correlation. Having a connection between two events does not necessarily mean that one causes the other. You also want to remind the students, in addition to the content, they can critique the structure of the argument, i.e., that there is not enough evidence provided to reach the conclusion that the author seeks. So the points here that the students really need to be very careful to follow the instructions, note any ambiguous terms that will need definition, pay very close attention to those problematic or flawed unstated assumptions. Try and think of overlooked possibilities, and this is a really important one that you usually see in the instructions, to think of additional evidence which would strengthen or weaken the author's claim. If X is true, would that mean that the author's argument falls apart, or does it add more support to the author's argument? And their conclusion needs to be some variation of, without additional evidence, we should be skeptical of the author's claim. Or because of the above problematic assumptions, the argument as it is presented is weak. Without changes to the structure and content of the argument, the author's conclusion is weak. Or it's unpersuasive, unconvincing, uncogent, unwarranted. But I strongly, strongly, strongly advise not to use the words invalid or unsound, valid or sound, because those terms apply to deductive logic, and you may not get somebody who's well versed enough in logic to make that distinction, but if you do, it will get you points lost. So stick to inductive language about being persuasive, being probable, being strong or weak. Then they organize again by templates. Eliminate the weakest points you've brainstormed, and of course choose the strongest. Those are usually the ones that you can write the most about. And I have a template where, again, the introduction paragraph is almost always the same in these. You restate the prompt. As I understand it, the author is arguing. You summarize your goal according to the instructions. I will attempt to show what necessary evidence is missing. I will show what unwarranted assumptions there are. I will try to elucidate the unanswered questions or alternative explanations. Whatever it is the instructions have specifically asked for needs to be explicitly addressed in that introductory paragraph. And then the thesis, the argument is weak or unconvincing because of at least 3 reasons. So the process I personally like to follow is in this first template. I state what the flaw is, whether it's an assumption, an unanswered question, a possible alternative explanation. I evaluate that statement. How and why is this a weakness, a problem, or a flaw in the argument? I propose a possible solution. This question could be answered if we had a survey or if we had more data about this group or something like that. And then you would provide some explanation about how this information fixes the problem, solves the flaw, or strengthens the arguments. And you do this for at least 2 more paragraphs and an additional paragraph if time permits. Your conclusion then is to summarize the main points, address the instructions, and then again restate additional evidence is needed. I'm running short on time. You can look at the other templates, and especially I want to emphasize using this following rubric. Does it make sense? Does it respond to the prompt? Is it thorough? Does it paraphrase the topic? Are both sides considered? Do the examples make sense? Is it detailed? Are they explained? Is there a strong conclusion? Is it well organized with mostly correct grammar and spelling and of the appropriate length? I'll stop there. See you guys in the next video.